कभी करती हैं मुलाकातें, कभी करती हैं मुलाकातें, कभी यादों में बरसातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें। मन की गहरी झील में कूद जाती हैं कभी, सोच के दरिया के संग संग बहती जाती हैं कभी। चाहे शाम हो या हो रातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें।
We have with us today Saba Naqvi, senior journalist, who's written a book, In Good Faith, which is what we're going to talk about. Saba, you have written this book over a period of 20 years, in the sense that the research took you that long and you kept, dipping into it and coming back. So, could you please tell me how you started writing this book? How did it all come together?
This book came as a reaction to the Ayodhya movement, to the demolition of the Babri Masjid. And it's also partly embedded in the story of my own family, because my father has been talking about this, who is himself a journalist, these sort of traditions for as long as I've been alive. And I used to think that that's a very romantic notion of the way things should be, but I decided to take the idea a step further. So when I had just started my career. I was a young sort of sub-editor somewhere in a particular magazine in Delhi, and such big momentous things were happening. The Ayodhya movement was so aggressive in the way it was played out that many of us felt that if we could, we should try and do something. So I did. So I left my job. I managed a small grant from some institute and a professor, with that I'm going to go and travel and find out about people who are neither absolute Hindus or absolute Muslims, or about cultural, musical traditions which come from the amalgamation from these kind of traditions, about people's folk gods. I'm going to find out. I'm going to actually go and record it. And I spent a year and a half doing that. I traveled all over India at that time. And so that was the basis for what would later become a book. I wrote a couple of articles, I collected all that material. Many academics then would tell me later, at that time, including Professor Ashish Nandi, that what happened to all these articles? Why aren't you doing something with it? Then I decided to write up essays around each, about some 20 of them. Some of it was lost, some of the articles were actually, everything had changed. And so I then decided to write essays from whatever research I had done, from my own journeys there and my revisits, you know. So that's how the whole thing came out. So it was a passion. It was, I never thought that I'm making a statement. That's one thing that, you know, people seem to misunderstand, is that I never thought that I'm making a statement that this is how it is or it isn't. I was just contesting this idea of absolute identities with evidence of things which are little traditions, little people, little communities, little shrines, musical traditions, contesting the idea of the sort of monolith. So this is how this, and I was very fortunate to grow up in a home where my father spoke of these things so often, you know, and so that's how the idea came. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And but then I was, you know, and I wanted to analyze it at a greater length. So this is how it happened.
In fact, your own life, in your own life, as you were growing up, you had both the Islamic and the Christian influences at home. And so how much did these personal life experiences shape the way this book developed?
I'm sure consciously I've not analyzed it, but I'm sure they did, because I grew up mainly in Delhi. But I had this, my mother was a Christian, my father was a Muslim, and all my friends were Hindus. So we had a household where we used to celebrate. As a child, I used to light up diyas, we used to have Holi, we used to go for all-night jagrans. I remember there was a particular friend of mine called Preeta, who's, they used to constantly have all-night jagrans. So we used to go there for the night. And So one grew up not thinking in terms of identity being boxed into a sort of place for hatred. So I'm sure it shaped the way I look at things, and I'm sure it shaped my reaction to these things. I was privileged. I had a good education. I thought I could do it, you know. So I was privileged, and I've always felt that if one can, even you should try and do something larger than yourself. So I actually quit a job in those days that was the place to work in, you know. There were no television channels which were. I actually quit the job and I just took off. And but I must say people were very kind. The Indian Express published a lot of my articles, and I got a small grant. But then I also realized that the work was also unusual. How many people were taking time off to do something like this, you know? And I literally traveled around the country in taking trains. This is not flying anywhere. Taking trains and buses, local buses, staying in small places, taking a bullock cart, you know, walking long distances. So it was also it was truly a journey. And you know, that travel across India, I went to every part of India. Had I just stuck in a job, I would never have seen what I did by just taking off. And I've been to now, so if anybody talks to me about Andhra Pradesh, I know what they're referring to. So that was absolutely one of those things which I just, I took it for granted, the work, for a while, but then I realized how much it enriched me later in life. And I'm so glad I got down to doing it, to making sense of it, you know. But for me, again, I'll say intellectually, I'm not saying that this is an answer to anything. These are lovely little things, you know. So our opposition to things which may trouble us, which we would like to contest, it's good to have evidence. So I've collected this, but you know, we have to have a different kind, that this is part of the way to oppose that, is also to understand what is happening. I've covered them. So all the players who were there in that time when I started this work, I know all the players who were the sort of leading lights of the Ram Janmabhoomi movement. So, you know, you must understand what, as a journalist, I've had the privilege also to go there to do that. So, large part of my life has actually been engaged in debating these issues. And this is a different sort of a way of doing it, as opposed to the sort of analytical, political analysis that I can do. You know? This was a different approach. So it's part of what I do, actually, you know, the sort of work that I've done all my life. So.
One of the themes that you've explored in the book is to look at the multiplicity of Islam in India, and you talk about attempting to excavate or attempting to find out the different facets of Islam. So and some very interesting stories and some very interesting incidents have been highlighted in the book. So would you like to tell us something?
You know, some of the most fascinating, of course, was this community of painters in Bengal, known as the Pattachitra painters, who said they were Muslims, but who said we also have a Hindu name. And they would paint only Hindu gods and goddesses in a patt or a scroll, and as the scroll would open up like this, they would sing a song about it. And they were all about, you know, a lot of Shakti figures in Bengal. So it was Durga and Kali and local gods, you know, folk gods. And they would perform and they would go to the village, and they were Muslims. They said that we are all Muslims. And so at one level we can say that's remarkable, but at the other level I must also share, you know, there is another dimension to the whole thing. The fact is they were not accepted by the more orthodox mainstream Muslims, you know. So with Islam you come into this fascinating terrain of musicians, artisans, particularly those who are very eclectic in the way they inhabit a landscape where they are writing about, singing about non-Muslim characters, doing that, and they will survive. They will survive just as various folk singers from Rajasthan, the Manganyars, the Langas, they too will survive. In fact, they're doing rather well. But they are always confronted
Yes.
with the idea that there is something impure in what they're doing. You know, having said that, the sort of the folk version of Islam is much more prevalent than we like to believe. You know, but you have to go searching for it. There is a multiplicity of identities even within the sort of Muslim monolith that's presented to us all the time.
So that's why it's not a monolith. I mean,
that's why
what
it's not a monolith.
Yeah.
It's not a monolith. You know,
And
although
yeah.
people are confronted with the idea that this is impure. You know, I mean, I'll say that. I'm
Sure.
not, because I'm not into the romanticizing anything here. That's not, so people do get confronted with that. But they just have their own way, they carve out their own worlds. They are homogeneous sort of entities unto themselves. They're little communities, you know. So it's not that they are sort of under a constant onslaught where they have to hide themselves, but yes. But there are members of the Islamic Muslim community who criticize such things quite routinely. You know, so, and Sufism itself has undergone these kind of transformations, because you had so many customs which have then attempted to be purged, linked to particular shrines, you know, long orders, Sufi orders. Again, because it absorbs so much of the sort of non-Muslim way of life, and it reflected that, you know, and it's not far from here. I mean, I think you still have at Nizamuddin, you still have the Basant celebrations,
Yes.
not
Yes.
far from where we are recording this program. Where I live in Mehroli, you still have this Phool Walon ki Sair, where they go to one Hindu temple, and also
That's
all
right.
of this still survives,
Yes, yes,
you know, in
yes.
some sort of way.
Yes.
But there is always, even within these shrines, you'll find groups which articulate, which like things to happen differently.
As identities harden and become more rigid, it seems, you know, around us, how do you feel, what do you see as the future of these people, particularly who inhabit no man's land, as you've called it, you know, who are also a bit of Hindu, also a bit of Muslim, you know, they're this and that, and what do you think will happen to them, like the mayors of Rajasthan and, you know, the Chitrakars of Bengal and so on, and several others that you've mentioned?
I think they'll survive in India, because India is predominantly a nation where you have a lot of, where everything is worshipped. Everything is sort of, you know, so it's a particular kind of landscape. The identities are hardening, there's no doubt about that. But because you have this multiplicity of gods, you have the high gods, you have the folk gods, you have, where was I reading somewhere, 33 million gods and goddesses or whatever. So everything finds a space.
Yeah.
You know, but if you look at the fate of some of these similar traditions, if you look what's happened to them in Pakistan, they've been completely sort of systematically erased.
Yes.
Because you've had a takeover of completely fundamentalist sort of ideas, and it's not. I'm not talking about mainstream Muslim society there. I'm talking about subsequently what's happened in the country. So I think it'll survive in India. Everything gets absorbed. It's never completely shunned or thrown out. It sort of mutates into something different. So, and some of these traditions in particular, let's take the musicians, they're actually doing very well.
Yes.
You know, the Manganyars and the Langas.
Yeah.
And look at the influence that the Sufi Qawwalis had on Hindi, on the sound of Hindi cinema.
Yeah.
Only in the past 10 years or so.
Yeah.
So, you know, just when you write the end obituary of something in India, it's born again.
In another incarnation.
In another incarnation, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So, so you know, I wouldn't like to say that things are very bad, even though identities may be hardening, you know.
A question I had was that you've spoken so much about the syncretistic traditions, and of course it's a fact of life for most of us, as is a sense of separation and otherness, which is also ingrained in the subcontinent, you know, through the caste system, which is now, you know, as old as the Vedas. So how do you respond to this sort of almost simultaneity of both integration and, you know, the energy of integration and this energy of separation, so to speak?
I know, it's you've given me a very philosophical question, but I absolutely agree with you. The best we can do in India is respect other people, you know, because there are many things where people are divided also, and people's whole sense of themselves comes from a particular clan, caste, community. You know, the reason why, okay, can I just divert a bit? I was just in Japan for 2 months on a fellowship. You know, now that is, compared to India, it's so homogeneous, the country, you know, and so I had to give a few public presentations and all over there, and as part of this whole thing, and then it was almost confusing sometimes to try and explain that mobilization in India means you start with a community, you start with an identity of a region, a language, a community, a caste, and that is how you then build up, you know. So yes, there is a lot of, I mean, look at the caste system, so certainly a lot of things divide us, and even within the Muslim community there are huge caste divisions. Huge, I mean, it's not supposed to be there, but there are huge divisions in the social order, you know. So there are many things that divide us, indeed, you know. But none of this, whether they unite us or whether they divide us or things are as they are, these things get a bad energy and they become dangerous when politics enters the frame. You've had the partition of India.
Exactly, yes.
You know,
yes.
these things have still survived. You've had such a bloody partition. These divisions and these unities that lie within all of us in India, it's the exploitation by politics to mobilize them one way or the other, be it on caste or community lines. That is when things can become dangerous in India, and we've seen that again and again. You know, when you compete, when you set one group to compete against the other, you know, otherwise things would just be as they are, you know. So this is what disrupts the whole sort of social contracts that people have within which they live, you know. So when politics and violence comes into the interplay of things, you know, that is when things really get disrupted for a while, and ugly things come out in India. All those divisions get starkly accentuated, and the unities between us, we completely forget them and lose them. You know.
And I think that's when we need to read your book and look at all that you know, joins us and unites us rather than what divides us.
I hope people do. You know, please read it. You know.
Thank you so much, Saba. Thank you so much for the enlightening discussion. Thank you.
जिंदगी के अनुभव हैं जिनको आपने किताबों में लिया है। अनुभव यात्रा किताबों की आपकी है, जिंदगी के साथ साथ जो चलती गई है नदी की तरह। बताइए। बहुत
सारे लोग संघर्ष करते हैं, उन लोगों के साथ मैंने भी अपना संघर्ष किया, और वो संघर्ष एक जिद थी, एक जुनून था कि जो जीवन ऐसे ही मुझे मिलने वाला है, मैं उसके अलावा कुछ अपने मन जैसा जीवन चुनना चाहती हूँ, और उसके लिए जो कुछ मेरे एफर्ट्स थे वो पूरी तरह मैंने लगाए। और सौभाग्यवश मैं जेल में काम करना चाहती थी। मेरे से पहले कोई महिला जेल में नहीं थी, इसलिए बहुत विरोधों का सामना भी करना पड़ा, परिवार से भी, मेरे ऑफिस वालों से भी, लेकिन मैंने सिलेक्शन लिया और मैं जेल में काम करने के लिए गई। और वहाँ मैंने ये देखा कि जो लोग आरोप में या अपराध करके जेल के अंदर आ जाते हैं, वो एक बहुत ही सच्ची और प्यारी दुनिया है, बहुत ही अच्छी दुनिया है, क्योंकि जो कुछ है वो सामने है, जो कुछ है वो स्पष्ट है, और उनके मनों को पढ़ करके एक अनुभव करना, और उनमें जो भी समाज और परिस्थितियों वश विरूपता आ गई है, विकृति आ गई है, उसको समझ करके उसे वापस पॉज दे करके समाज की मुख्य धारा में शामिल करने का एक बहुत ही चुनौती भरा अवसर वहाँ है।
प्रीता, जो चुनौती है जेल की, जो डूंगरपुर से शुरू हुई, उसके पहले धौलपुर के बीहड़ों में आप रही, और खिड़नी कहानी आपकी है, जो चुनौती है कहानी की, जो संघर्ष की चुनौती है, जीवन के संघर्ष की, लेखन के संघर्ष की। कुछ खिड़नी के बारे में भी बताइए ना।
देखिए, खिड़नी की छाह एक वृंदा नाम की लड़की की कहानी है, और उसमें उसने खेत में किसान के घर झोंपड़ियों में रहने वाली उस लड़की ने कैसे अपने जीवन का संघर्ष किया, कैसे जीवन की विरूपताओं का सामना किया, मार काट, पुलिस, कोर्ट कचहरी, घर के तकलीफ़ें, बाहर की तकलीफ़ें, उन सबको सहते हुए, निकलते हुए वो अपने नए बच्चों को, नई पौध को किस तरह से दिशा निर्देश करने का प्रयास कर रही है। और उसमें जो सबसे बड़ा जो मेन केंद्र बिंदु है वो ये है कि बहुत कुछ घटता है जीवन में, लेकिन क्षमा करके और दुआ और बद्दुआ को साथ लेते हुए, दुआ और बद्दुआ की शाश्वतता को महसूस करते हुए, जो कुछ बीत गया उससे निकल करके वर्तमान से जुड़ना है, इस अच्छी तरह से जुड़ना है कि हम अच्छा भविष्य अपने बच्चों को दे सकें। ऐसा मैंने विचार किया है।
अच्छा भविष्य अपने बच्चों को दे सकें, यानी बाकी सब खैरियत है।
जी।
इस खैरियत से कविता हो जाए।
तुम्हारी धरती पर गूंजे जब जब चीत्कार और धमाके, मेरी धरती में बोई गई जेल की दीवारें, और तुम्हारी धरती पर हुए जब जब विश्वास, तुम्हारी धरती पर होम हुए जब जब विश्वास, मेरी धरती कैद हो गई जेल के 7 तालों में।
जेल के 7 तालों में।
और तुम्हारी धरती पर अनबन हुई जब जब प्यार की सम्मान से, मेरी धरती में मर गई कुछ और जिंदा सांसें, और तुम अपनी धरती पर गुंजाओ तो ज़रा कालजयी शांति मंत्र, तुम अपनी धरती पर गुंजाओ तो ज़रा कालजयी शांति मंत्र, मेरी जेल हो जाएगी तुम्हारी तपोस्थली, मेरी जेल हो जाएगी तुम्हारी तपोस्थली। धन्यवाद।
इस तपोस्थली में यानी बाकी सब खैरियत है में प्रीता कुछ इस तरह भी लिखती हैं, बस्ती भर के सपनों से फरार होकर, बस्ती भर के सपनों से फरार होकर आप बसे हैं जेल में कुछ बोनसाई, सजीव दिखते से चमकीले चटक फूलों से लदे हुए, अभी सलाखें मीठी नींद में हैं, अभी सलाखें मीठी नींद में हैं, उधर बौने बस्तियों में जा पहुँचे थानों तक, कचहरी तक, जेलें आबाद हो रही हैं, जेलें आबाद हो रही हैं। प्रीता, ये जो आबाद हो रही जेलें हैं ये सब क्या है?
समाज का कचरा घर जेलों को माना जाता है। जो समाज का कचरा घर अगर हम जेलों में रखते हैं तो हमारा और समाज का और हमारी सरकार का और सबका मिलजुल कर ये दायित्व है कि ये कचरा घर जल्दी से रिसाइकिल होकर के वापस मेन स्ट्रीम में शामिल हो जाए। अन्यथा ये इंसान है, ये फाइलें नहीं हैं, ये बहुत जल्दी बदबू देने लगेंगी, ये बहुत जल्दी समाज को प्रदूषित करने लगेंगी। तो ये आबादियाँ बढ़नी नहीं चाहिए, ये जल्दी से मेन स्ट्रीम में साफ स्वच्छ होकर के पॉज दे करके मनुष्य को वापस जाना चाहिए। ये हम सबको, हमारी पूरी दुनिया को सबसे पहले प्राथमिकता हमारी ये बननी पड़ेगी। अन्यथा जेलों का पॉल्यूशन बहुत जल्दी हमें बहुत चिंतनीय स्थितियों में डाल सकता है।